although mine's not coffee.
Mhm.
So welcome to Talking Niagara this morning, everybody, and we're going to do something different. Talking Niagara we've been largely talking about news stories as they've been breaking. Well, we haven't really gone into some depth in some things, and I think it's about time we kind of start to investigate what we believe might well be what needs to change in the region. Right on 17th of April, I've got Laurie Lococo coming with us, coming on the show, and she should be giving us a view about where she believes Niagara Falls to be, what needs to change, what needs to go forward. And good morning, Mike Cushman.
Hey, Mike Cushman. So Mike Cushman had his cup of coffee. That's good.
Well, mine wasn't a cup of coffee, by the way. I rarely drink coffee at this time in the morning. I actually drink a hot water with
Lemon.
honey
Honey lemon?
some let's call them tea masala.
Mm. Oh yeah, that mix you brought to the office that
That's
one
somewhere
time.
like that, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Making up some of those mixes in advance now, and I have them in the morning, so I just sieve them into the thing. It's actually quite nice. I don't, because I've never been a tea drinker, but that's kind of what I do in its place. So here's the big question, big open question, and I suppose it is out there, and I probably a lot of people will agree on some things that I think we can say here quite easily. We need better jobs, we need better transit, we need to reduce homelessness, we need more things for local people to do. I think we can probably agree that those are reasonable expectations that people might need.
Oh, absolutely. I think people will all say that that we need these things because I think anybody in Niagara region, if you ask them what we would like to see improved in Niagara region, and they're also like better housing opportunities, more affordable housing, I think is a big issue too.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, but again, absolutely. But again, here's we live in an odd region insofar as I know Mike often talks about housing, about the need for reasonable cost housing, and it's absolutely right. But we live in a region whereby I believe we generally are underpaid. We live in one of the poorest regions in Ontario.
Well, definitely, it's because the industries that we choose to focus on, and in these industries, we don't choose to pay people very well. We've got a
Yeah.
lot of retail, we got a lot of hospitality, we got a lot of food and accommodation sectors, and those industries don't traditionally pay people very well.
Yeah, and exactly, and particularly the tourist sector that is here has a bad reputation. So in a way, getting better jobs means that people are therefore able to afford better housing.
Yep, definitely. And this is one
Right.
of the things that's a problem. Like, if you're not, like, manufacturing used to be a big thing in Niagara, where you can go get a job at GM or Thompson Products or Kelsey Hayes or whatever, but all these jobs just took a flying leap, and they're gone.
Well,
There
and
are
the other
still some jobs like that around, but not as many as there were before.
Yeah, but the other interesting thing also about that is those jobs used to pay not just above minimum wage, not 15.80 or whatever, 16.05 or whatever the current minimum wage is, not even like $19, which might well be considered the living wage in the area. Sometimes these jobs will pay $30, $40, $50, $60 an hour.
Hmm.
Right.
Exactly.
And it's a pity that they have gone. You know, but in a way, it's also many of those industries used to be an eyesore in a way, didn't they?
Yeah, they were problems like this. Mike Cushman always talks about Sienna-Med and other types of industries that were there and have caused and left us gifts that will last for years to come within
Well,
our environment.
I was going to ask I was going to ask Mike the question. You know, been thinking about this question for a while. Hey, Mike, is there any where in the Niagara region that isn't contaminated? Let's start there, because I bet the answer is Peter. No, there isn't. There's not many. You know, I can name you this site and that site and the other site, and they're all contaminated. And
Too many brownfields.
I don't doubt that Mike is right, because he knows about the history of our, you know, he knows about the history of our industry in our region. And, you know, for example, he knew about the contribution we made to the Manhattan Project in terms of getting, you know, there was something that we made here in Niagara that was part of getting the atomic bomb built.
Hmm. And probably up north too, where I hailed from. You have uranium up there.
Yep. And Mike just answered that question. So he's talking specifically about South End. McLeod Road did not have a lot of industry. Yep. Well, that's fair enough. Absolutely. So
Yep.
those new homes that are being built in those areas are generally on reasonably clean land. And I said
Good.
reasonably because
Reasonably.
because every lot has to be looked at on its own merit. All
Yeah.
right.
I
Okay.
think they
So
have to have an environmental assessment or something before they can build anything somewhere.
Mike has added another thing, which said we should fight for lower hydro because we have clean source of energy, and that's why we lost jobs. Hydro rates, you know, hydro rates went up basically.
Yeah. Well, this is one thing is you have a hydro source called Niagara Falls.
Yeah. Well,
And
that's,
that's
and you see, despite what he might say about criticize Cyanamid on Fourth Avenue for, is Cyanamid at least had decent paying jobs.
yeah.
Right? They had high, you know, they maintained a higher wage within Niagara Falls. And okay, so we've only been talking here about Niagara Falls. For example, what's the situation in St. Catharines that in that respect?
Well, we have similar brownfield areas like the old GM property on
Yeah.
Ontario Street. And we also have other properties that are still abandoned or about to be abandoned where there was formerly industry there. Because this is one of the things that they have. Like on Ontario Street, they have a huge amount of stuff on Ontario Street around Pleasant Avenue and Marjorie Avenue. There is a whole range or a whole circle of land there where it was actually considered a cancer belt at one time. Might be still there, I don't know. There's, but they have to clean up that land so that that they can start building or using the land
Well,
for other things.
one of the questions I talked with Mike about this one at length is a question about how do we deal with some of these brownfield sites? How do we get rid of the contamination? And you know, the original thing for the cyanamide plant was that they were supposed to be left for 50, 60 years or more, and that would take care of itself. But what Mike has been saying about this is it doesn't take care of itself. Essentially, what you need to do is to remove all the soil, go down to the bedrock, and even there, you wouldn't necessarily get rid of it, because in fact, what happens is the soil between the topsoil and the bedrock, you've got this situation whereby as it rains, it forces the chemicals down. and once it dries,
Mhm.
the chemicals come back up. So the
Mhm.
chemicals are actually into the cracks of the limestone that sits underneath this area,
Yep.
and
And
that's
if this is a case where there's a lot of these chemicals, can you imagine what those workers have been going through, what they've been exposed to? Hey, those that have
yeah,
been there.
yeah,
So that was very much of a risky type of job.
yeah. And the point being is, how do you then burn them? How do you then get rid of them? Because you can take the soil away and reprocess them, but unless you take the soil away and you can basically clean out the limestone underneath, which you can't, you know,
Mhm.
how do you get rid of that stuff? How do you
Yeah,
resolve that
it's a
issue?
very, it is an expensive process, and whoever gets saddled with the land is gonna take responsibility, and this is it. If they wanna develop the land, they're gonna have to do this. They're gonna
Yeah,
have to take responsibility before they're going to get everybody else to. Yeah, Dom Tower is another one, which, Mike has raised. I mean,
yeah,
these are all properties here in like St. Catharines and Ferranti Pa oh, yeah. Like, that's what I said, there's plenty of those sites here in St. Catharines. And then the thing is we have to try to, clean up this land, and then we can try to save, some of the money that we're putting on in healthcare because, like, I've worked with a lot of the workers in many of these factories, and they've had some very horrible health problems as a result of working
well,
where they were
and
working.
yeah, and part of the issue there is what we need to do is clean that soil up and clean those areas up and replace it as best we can. And it's 40 years since the anime closed here in Niagara Falls. So maybe the time has come to start cleaning that stuff, but we have to dedicate time to actually cleaning the land, not doing a
Mhm.
half-assed job, not not really, you know, do a proper job. It's get
Yep,
it done before they build the Thoroldstone Road extension.
yep, and there's always a question of who pays for it, and question of, is there something that the city can do to force this to happen? And I'm not sure what the answers to that will be, but I do know that, there was some discussion with, city council at one time in St. Catharines, and our new Mayor Cisco, Matt Cisco, he was very, knowledgeable and appreciative of the situation. It's just that I think, getting some of these, corporate players to act where they're going to have to spend, tons of money before they can actually do anything with the
But
property, they may be reluctant.
that's a problem, isn't it? And in some respects, so in some respects, the company that should have been responsible for much of the cleanup would have been would have been GM, Cyanamid, or the old owners of the land.
Yep, Randy Packard, Dom Tower,
Yeah,
whoever had
yeah,
the property before it
yeah,
became a brownfield, and
yeah.
whoever
And how
purchased it after,
you
because
know,
they're
and
making the people who own it now, they're
yeah,
making it their problem.
and here's the question. Well, they're making it partially the city's problem, because how do we deal with that? How do we make that land available again out there?
Mhm.
How do we even put it back into industrial usage? The only way we can realistically do that is going to be clean it up. Now,
Yeah.
okay, and who pays for the cleanup?
Oh, yeah.
If you're going to invite a new person to come in and do develop the land, who pays for the cleanup is largely the city, right? So
Yep.
it's going to be people like you and I, the
Yep.
average taxpayer, that
Yeah,
ends up.
because what happens is it falls onto our property taxes, and
Yeah,
whether the province or anybody will kick in anything, I don't know, but it's, largely gonna be ending up on the taxpayers' shoulders, and that does not help anything towards affordable housing, because as my property taxes go up and your property taxes go up, And if we own this property, we're renting it out to someone, our expenses are higher, so we have to charge higher rents.
Yeah. Well, and aside from it, and yeah, exactly all of that kind of stuff. But then the question is that, okay, so somebody who brings jobs along, and if they are paying, if they're paying, um, I don't really know if they're paying, let's say, $100 a square foot for the land to buy the land here. And I'm not saying, I'm not basing these figures on any reality, but if they're buying the land at, let's say, $100 a square foot, right?
Hmm.
Um, but in order to clean it up, they have to spend another $100 a square foot. And then they're going, well, how do I compare this against a plot that I might buy in Toronto? So the plot that he might buy in Toronto might well be $150 a square foot, but he doesn't have to clean it up. So
Yep.
where's the developer going to go? He's going to go to Toronto because he doesn't have the already known $100 a square foot cost to clean it up,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
I don't blame them in a way because, you
Yeah.
know, um, how do you deal with that as a problem? And
Especially
again,
now with this build, 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 and we got to build fast, better, faster for more housing. And some developers do want to do that. They do want to get in there and get their shovels in the ground. But doing this is going to be very difficult if we're going to have to take all of these steps first. And our communities want people to take these steps first because we can't have people living on contaminated land either.
yeah, and that's the point. Is industry and government needs to be, I think, needs to be communicating together, needs to be in a partnership in terms of getting this done. And in some respects,
Absolutely.
it's
Industry
up
needs to play
to,
a big part of this.
yeah, it's up to basically industry in general, not just the local industry that we have here, we're going to be building here in Niagara, but as a generalized thing that industry needs to actually do something
Yep.
old industrial land across the country, not just here, everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Needs to be a public private partnership about how we're going to deal with this kind of stuff, because there's hundreds of former industrial sites that are suffering the same issue,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, and this is one of the things where we have a lot of these issues in St. Catharines, and it's frequently talked about. People in St. Catharines have a lot of concern about it, and they have raised it. And there is a group that has approached City Hall about that. And there's people there, environmental activists in many ways. They want to see this done. And in many ways, they're working with people who also want to see better affordable housing built. And the people with better affordable housing, they also want to see this done too, because they don't want to see a lot of problems when they build housing because they don't want to have to tear it all down again and then rebuild. They
I'm
want to
gonna
make sure things are safe.
I'm gonna be the cynic for the moment. Okay, so you were saying there's a group that has basically asked City Hall about how we deal with the cleanup, right?
Yep.
Hey, yeah, but we've all heard those damn environmental people who just do not have any form of responsibility other than spending public money, and they don't really take it on, and really, they don't really understand what the issues are here at play, do they? So really all they want to do ever is spend public money, right?
Hmm.
I
From what
know.
my understanding was, is I
I,
think that there was litigation or threatened litigation of some sort. I don't know the details of this specifically,
yeah,
but I think to some extent we have to make the industries that were there or created the brownfields in the first place for them to come back and say, okay, now it's time to start cleaning up after yourselves. Like if you went
yeah.
inside somebody's house and then you made a mess there and caused all kinds of problems. I mean, naturally, you're going to go back there and you're going to clean up after yourself. Right? I mean, this is just, it's just a matter of fact. But now we're talking about a large community level problem that needs to be addressed. And it's very difficult to get this addressed because some of these industries, they don't want to come back and do this. They don't want to spend the money on doing it because they're no longer making any money on that land or
Yeah,
property.
and that's part of the problem, is that they made millions, perhaps billions from the land, but now they don't want to be part of solving the issue.
Yeah. And this is where we have to say, okay, this is a problem here. Let's get these people to clean it up. Let's bring them back to the table and say, hey, you got to clean up this mess. Hey, stop selling the land to other people so that they can buy your mess, and they have to clean it up, because that's basically what it's been. It's called pass the baby around. I always call it passing the baby around. Hey,
Well,
where
Mike is basically saying, I tried to save government money on these issues by addressing it decades ago, which would have saved them billions. And that's for sure, because if you think about this, the new arts center, living arts center, which we put up in Niagara Falls, sorry, the Art Exchange, right, which we put
Mhm.
up in Niagara Falls. When they first suggested it, when they had the land, same plot of land, they first suggested it, and the total project cost was going to be $10 million. The next year, when they basically put it on the agenda to be done, the total cost was going to be $12 million. All right.
Hmm.
When it's done 4 years later, the total cost was $17 million. So part of the problem we face is that precisely that. If a government gets in and cleans a thing when it's first noticed as a problem, or if the issue is cleaned first off when it's first noticed a problem, you can deal with the problem, clean it up, and save a lot of money.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to do this, and this is the thing, because try to get these things addressed. And if there's current industry on a property, and then that industry is either moving or is closing down, there needs to be some plans for it to close down properly before they're allowed to sell the property or dispense with it. I don't know if there's anything there that is in place that meets these requirements, but there should be. There should be something
Yeah.
there.
Okay, so one of the things we've been discussing there is about the brownfield, which in a way is an impediment to bringing better jobs, isn't it?
Yes, in many ways. And I also think that we also have to look at other industries. The problem that we have in Niagara is it's always been either GM town or hospitality tourist town. Okay? And we can't be relying on either of those. We have to have a diversity of industries. Okay?
Well,
Some jobs pay very well. So right now, what the well-paying jobs are, you have to work for government if you want to get a job. Go get a job at the region or a job at Brock University or something. Then you'll get a good paying job. But even then, even those jobs are subject to cutback and layoff because of budgets and so forth.
well,
So the thing is, we're not going to have any good jobs or source of good jobs unless we start developing a private industry that will be responsive to a developing diversification of jobs. Like Kitchener-Waterloo has done this. They've set themselves up in technology and other types of jobs where they used to be similar to us, and until they started becoming more of a tech hub. And they have a
well,
number of high-paying
I
employers there.
I don't necessarily think that the answer is by becoming an individual, is by supporting one and one only industry. I would
Yeah,
basically
that'd
be
be
saying
different.
to, in my view, hey, I met this guy who was a brilliant game writer. He was 17 years old, brilliant game writer. He showed me some of his stuff. This is about 10 years ago now, so he'd been in his mid 20s. but I bet you he isn't he isn't even in the Niagara region anymore. He's probably in California. Well,
Oh yeah.
if we'd have had the you know, if we'd have had the local support, local development, why couldn't we have had a, you know, a programming shop in Niagara?
Yep, this is one of the things. We had Silicon Knights a while ago, and Silicon Knights disappeared.
Yeah. Right. So we have the Welland Canal, we have the border, we have lucrative things for industry and low dollars. Now, again, Mike also said earlier on about we need to bring hydro, you know, reduce the cost of hydro for local people instead of making it, you know, making it a more national thing.
Yeah.
And
There's
what he's
gonna
basically
have to be
saying is let's
something
take
where
it
we
off
have to
the
do
grid.
with energy policy. I don't know what the answer is in that way, but there has to be either real competition in that industry or there has to be some kind of thing where the prices are regulated in some way. I'm not sure what the answer would be because what we have is I paid my electricity through something called Electra in St.
Yeah.
Catharines, and I understand NPE covers you in Niagara Falls.
Yeah,
Okay, so
Niagara
this,
Provincial. Yeah, no, Niagara Provincial Energy is our thing. But there's a difference between Electra and we were actually walking past the one in Hamilton yesterday, weren't we? We were talking
yeah,
about this in Hamilton yesterday.
yeah,
Electra is a multi-city electric company that provides energy to, you know, a lot of areas, and in some respects, it's akin to what existed in the UK when I was there, is that we'd originally had energy that was started in certain regions of the country, but then when they had been sold off from their when Margaret Thatcher sold them off, they basically competed against one another in that area. And the interesting thing about the competition that they brought is that even though it was the same energy supply, I could buy my energy cheaper from Scottish Energy than I could from the local energy company,
mm,
right? Because they brought in competition, you know, at the moment, I only have the only possibility I have is Niagara Provincial Energy. I can't change,
yeah,
right? In St. Catharines, the only possibility you have is buying Electra. You can't
yeah,
change.
exactly. It's not like they have a ton of energy companies that we can select from. Like you could go down to the States and you ever notice how in the US they have like the telecom companies. Like they
Yeah.
can get a cell phone plan identical to what you and I can get here, and they're paying like less than half of what we are.
Well, yeah, I was going to say my telephone plan. If I'm looking at some of these plans that they have in America, I can get my telephone plan for $25.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm with
So
the
there's
cheapest.
lots of problems
Yeah.
with what we're doing here.
Yeah, I'm with the cheapest company in Canada, and I'm paying 3 times that at least.
Yep,
You know?
exactly. And this is
Yeah.
and things have to change with this sort of thing because especially when we're looking at business services, employment services, where we're dealing with it. If you're running a business and then you have to pay more for energy costs, pay more for telecommunications costs, more for all of these other costs, hey, where are you going to have in the budget to pay your workers more?
Well, in fact, actually, I think it's about how you bring what industries you attract here, right?
Hmm.
And I said this in my election platform back in 22. We need to be working with those industries that will typically bring in higher value jobs. In other words, let's not be inviting in people that are paying 15, 16, 17, 18, 20, less than $20 an hour. Let's be inviting in people that are going to be paying 30, 40, 50, $60 an hour,
Yep.
whether or not they are unionized. whatever they produce, let's work with them to bring those skills
Mhm.
into this region, because that reduces the dependency on tourism.
And we
Niagara
also need
Falls,
to look at our education system. What are we
well,
training people to
that's
do?
true. That's true. And let's come back to that. You see, back in the day when we had cyanamide here, the equivalent of the cyanamide workers were earning probably the equivalent of, 40, 50, $60 an hour in today's economy. And so even if one member of the family was working in cyanamide at 40, 50, $60 an hour, and the other was working in the tourism sector at 15, 15, 16, $17 an hour, you'd have that ability to, you'd have a joint income that was better.
Hmm. Exactly. Like this is like what we have here is what people are just hoping that people could have, like each person, member of a couple, could have each have a minimum wage job, and they're lucky.
Well, one of the problems, okay, so Larry Parliament says there are more people in the USA, so they can keep the rates cheaper on things like telecom, and that is true to a certain extent. But the thing is about this is that we hear excuses all the time from people like Bell and Rogers. Oh, we've got to create the, the reason the cost is high is because we've spent on the network. No. Bell's network compared to the network in the USA, compared to the networks that are available in Europe, is utter rubbish. I do not believe for a second, because I'm in contact with Americans, I'm in contact with Australians, I'm in contact with Europeans all the time. I do not believe for a second that Bell has the best network in the world. They do not. Right?
I'm not too impressed with that argument anymore because there's only so long they could ride on that
Yeah,
hotel.
yeah. A network is, and in any case, whether you're on Freedom, whether you're on Bell, whether you're on Kudo, or whatever network you are on, you are sitting generally upon actually the same network. You're using the same technology. If you're on Bell and I'm on Freedom, which I know is the situation, right? I pick up my phone, it's the same airwaves as the phone. If you were in this room right now and you picked up your phone, you'd be using the same cell tower, most likely.
Yeah, exactly. And these are part of the public infrastructure.
Yeah.
That's what I said. They can't be complaining about that. Oh, we built all this stuff. Like you might have built all this stuff in 4 BC, but we need something more now.
Yeah.
And things are now becoming more of the infrastructure where they're actually building some areas where they have to build broadband and more cell towers and other areas.
Yeah.
And of course, with all the immigration that we're getting, we're going to get more people so they can sell to more people. And I'd like to see them lower the prices as a result.
Can I bring up something that I've talked to you personally about before, but I've never put on this show before? One of the concerns that I have in relation to minimum wage. Minimum wage was really put out there as being, okay, the minimum wage that you should earn if you're just leaving school at 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. The minimum wage you should earn should be X. Now, minimum wage shouldn't be the stated minimum wage that we have province-wide, nationwide, should only be for the youngest workers that we employ. If you're talking about a person with 10 years experience, they should be earning the equivalent of 10 years, additional 10 years experience, additional pay on their pay packet. You've got somebody with 20 years experience, the pay rate should be higher, much, much higher. The trouble is, at the moment, we have a situation whereby slowly, the minimum wage has gone up over time. But the average wage has gone from this situation, is coming down and down and down. And at the moment, sometime in the next 10 years, I predict that, that minimum wage and average wage are going to meet or get close to meeting, going to be this close to meeting on a
It'd be
chart.
the same. And it'd be the same.
And the weirdest thing is that when you talk about average wage, you're talking about workers who are getting minimum wage, and you're talking about workers who are earning $1 million, right? Okay,
Mhm.
there's fewer workers that earn $1 million than earn minimum wage. There's a heck of a lot more workers that earn minimum wage. But the
Yeah.
point being is average wage should be nowhere near minimum wage. The
Yeah.
average wage should be well above minimum wage. What the
Yeah.
heck are we doing with, why the heck are we moving that way?
Yeah. Right now, these things don't have any relationship whatsoever to how much it actually costs to live in the city.
Yeah. Okay.
Pay what people make.
Karen says she knows a person who works in a factory in St. Catharines. The factory has been operating 2 shifts a day. The third shift is totally doable, but the company cannot pay the electric bill for that third shift.
Oh, I
Yeah.
remember that. I remember that because that was a big problem that has come out from the mid 2000s when there was extremely high hydro, and then they had to regulate the cost of hydro because many of the industries were suffering because of the high cost of hydro, and some of them had to lay off a whole bunch of people or shut down or have shutdown days.
Yeah, yeah, and actually, that's an interesting question because, in fact, I can remember days when that was a big problem because, if you're running 24/7, 3 shifts, 24/7, 365 days a year. In fact, actually, you're talking about more like 5 shifts because you're talking about weekend work as well,
Hmm.
right? Um, so you're working those shifts, keeping the plant running 24/7. There would be a situation whereby I recall having this discussion with somebody many years ago about, okay, so what does it cost to shut down a plant, and what does it cost to restart a plant? All right.
Yeah.
And granted, this was back in the 80s when I asked that question, and maybe the technology has moved on, etc. And I don't know about that, but he basically said what happens here. It can take at the worst case, if we've had a shutdown, it can take us as much as 4 hours to get this line back up to speed again if there's a
Hmm.
if there's a full and total shutdown. Now, if they have a problem in one area, where they're sorting a particular product or they're doing something in one particular area, they can get that one area sorted, and there will be backups in the line, but they're back in and out in an hour, typically,
Hmm.
right? So they lose an hour when they lose that segment of the line, but it's not the same as shutting the whole damn thing down.
Yeah. And this is what's been happening with some of them because I know that I was encountering a lot of that, and I was in discussions when they had these really high hydro bills. And then there was and it just seems to be going up and up and up and up. And even for our home hydro, it's been going up and up and up. And they do have programs for people who are very, very low income, Ontario Electricity Support Program, for people to do that. But it does nothing to help the industry that has to be able to pay that to keep up with the workers so that they could continue to pay workers, continue to operate and make money, and continue to contribute to the economy of a region.
Yeah. And okay, so we're talking here about jobs and better jobs, but how do we bring them about? I think it's largely in the discussions municipal leaders have with industry leaders in any area is largely brings about, okay, if you and I were in the business of in a bottling factory business, hey, and we built it, let's say in Thorold, right?
Hmm.
um it was the way where we started it. The likelihood is we're going to, as we expand it, we're going from 20,000 bottles a day to 40,000 bottles a day, and we're going to thank Thorold for doing so. We're going to build that extra plant in Thorold, and maybe we can't get the workers in Thorold, or maybe we don't have the square footage in the Thorold plant. Now maybe we need to move it to Welland or somewhere else, right? But the
Mhm.
point being is, generally speaking, if you're in a business like that, you generally stay in the same area you brought up in, because you probably live there for one.
Yep,
Right?
exactly. It's like you raise your family there and you have family members there, so you'd like to build your business there and then,
Yeah.
then see it grow.
And exactly. So you tend to take the local approach, even if you're selling now 2/3 of your product to Southern California. You're still going to largely develop your local area, even if you started opening a factory in Southern California.
Absolutely. There is a couple of manufacturers that I did know and I did work with in the early 2000s that have developed here from Niagara. They do still have a presence here, but they also sell like overseas, in the Middle
Yeah.
East, US, all over the place.
Yeah, and exactly. So generally, people who are in an area tend to stay in an area, and they use that as their, corporate hub. Even if
Yep.
they're, even if, let's say, okay, you kind of go, well, I can't get the work I need for my head office. I'm going to make my head office in Hamilton because it's more convenient. Everybody knows where Hamilton is. Nobody knows little village Niagara. you know, um, so you
Village.
move your, let's say in that example, you move your headquarters to Hamilton, but again, it's still local, right? It's
Hmm.
still something that's fairly local, and you're still dedicated to the local community, right? So in a way, that's about having better jobs local. But again, that doesn't. I think the issue that we have on our next issue is about reducing homelessness. And part of the problem that we have with homelessness is, I think, that we've got a situation. Well, we know that the prices of rent has gone sky high, right? We know
Hmm.
that, and we also know that largely homelessness was brought upon by the fact that during the pandemic, or the rise in homelessness was brought about by the fact that during the pandemic there were no new jobs to be had.
Hmm.
All right. So homelessness, theoretically, and I'm talking theoretically, homelessness should never be an issue, shouldn't even be raised on any platform by anybody, because if you bring better jobs, and put in place good value housing, you should reduce the homelessness to nothing.
Well, that's true in a way, but there are some people who do need, who are not able to get the better jobs. I mean, you can have some well-paying jobs or even a good number of well-paying jobs, but not everybody in the community who
True.
needs to work is going to get them.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
true.
Yeah. And then many people are not even going to get the lower paying jobs. Some people are going to be, maybe they have a disability, maybe they're retired, they don't have much of a pension, maybe they're a student, but they still have to support themselves. There's a lot of different circumstances that could require someone to have an income, having a living wage income while they are either temporarily or long term unemployed.
Okay, a interesting question here. I truly believe we need a countrywide strike against the real estate prices, says
Oh,
Mark.
yes. How are
Now,
we going to do it, Mike? Are we going to organize it?
yeah, I'd be intrigued to know how you're going to do that. And
Yep.
here's the thing: so you're actually going to go on strike from your job, potentially get fired because your housing situation is going through the roof. Not so sure that's going to achieve success. And
And we're going to organize the pickets in front of the realty offices or.
yeah, and you know, I'd like to see how that becomes a success. We do have a big homelessness situation, and homelessness is not just brought up. It is in part brought about by the fact that we don't have better jobs, right?
Yep.
Homelessness is in part brought about by the fact that we have that the real estate is out of sight. However, let's let's step back for a moment. Prior to about 2016, um, essentially home prices in the Niagara region had been on a flat line since about 2020. Sorry, for the last 25 years. So prior to about 2016, you're talking about going back to about 2000 or earlier than 2000, maybe. So that would be 1996. Go back 20 years. So 1996, how home prices in the Niagara region hadn't risen since then, right? Until
They
about
did in some
2000.
way. They have in some way
Small,
because I was
small
talking.
amount, 1% here and 1% there. And when I first moved into Niagara region, I was surprised that it was possible to go buy a house for less than $50,000.
Hmm.
Right
Yeah,
now, okay, the house that was on offer for less than $50,000 needed, in all fairness, needed $50,000 worth of work to it.
handyman special.
Yeah, it was the handyman special. Yes, definitely. Right. Not a place that I took one look at it and went with my getting older and with my aches and pains and everything like that. I don't want to do this
Oh,
project.
Peter,
Right now,
I can do it.
that said, that even here, moving into this particular place that I moved into, it's still, still $50,000 that spent on this house because of the fact that the person who owned it prior to us hadn't changed it since the 60s.
Yeah, and
There's
they had
been
knob and tube wiring.
knob and tube wiring. It's that's something that was she complained because she had to spend money to resolve the knob and tube wiring issue.
Hmm.
Right. But the point being is that the home prices had reasonably flatlined, and by the time we were getting to 2002, by about 2010, 2012, it was possible to get some real bargain homes in the Niagara region.
Yeah.
And at the moment, Mike is basically saying we can't afford anything because real estate being allowed to run amok. What can you do? Yeah, and that's actually an interesting question. Okay, in that respect.
And we have to find a balance there somewhere because it's not just necessarily said, okay, we got to get the housing so people could afford to buy them. Yeah, we do. We do. We want to be able to have housing owned by a whole variety of people, not a monopoly of corporations owning all these houses. What we need to have is we want to be able to have somebody, well, people like you and I be able to buy a house and something that we could retire in and live in. But also, if we're looking at renting places out to people, we want to be able to rent them out for reasonable rates. Okay? Right now, the way it is, the Bank of Canada, I blame for a large part of this, because now we have to pay huge, humongous interest rates on higher mortgages because you have to pay higher payments for these mortgages because
Yeah.
you can't, and people are being stressed that where you are held to a higher standard to be able to get a mortgage.
Oh
So
yeah.
you almost have to make more money to be able to get a mortgage. So there's less
Well,
people
that
who are
is
able to do
always.
this.
And that's always been the weirdest thing about mortgages. It's like, okay, if I were to, I rent my house right now. Let's say, just to paint a picture, I'm saying I rent my house right now. I pay 1,500. I'm lucky to have had it for 15 years, right? I pay 1,500 for a three bedroom place. I got a great deal here, right? But if I were to buy it on a mortgage, well, wind the clock back 5 years. If I were to buy it on a mortgage, I'd be spending 900 a month on the mortgage, right?
Mhm.
Um, and if what I don't get is why the bank doesn't look at that and go, I understand that. Okay, $1,500 on rent. If you were to buy this house, you'd be paying 900 on mortgage, and hey, you'd be paying that 900 to me, so I want that money. I want that money if I'm the bank, if I'm the banker. Um, you know, why doesn't the bank look at that sort of thing?
Well, they don't. Like you just say, oh, well, you don't make enough money to
Yeah,
pay the
yeah.
$900 a month mortgage, but you certainly can pay enough to pay $2,000 a month rent. Hi, Gary.
Yeah, and that's kind of weird. That's kind of weird how that goes, isn't it?
Yeah.
That we end up with things like this. Okay, so we're going to dive into some of the more details on this because we're going to do some research in the next 24 hours about some of these topics. Okay, so we're going to be coming back to some of the questions that we need to bring change about. Okay, so here's another question for you. Should property tax be ended when all family members are 65 or older?
I'm of two minds about that because if you do that, then the property taxes will be higher for everybody else.
Yeah,
Yeah, and for businesses and so forth. And just because you're 65 or older doesn't mean that you could afford less. There's a lot of people who 65 or older and who are fully retired who make a lot more money than I do when I'm fully working.
yeah. Well, that's true as well. And the other question that I have about raising it for 65 or over, what I do not like at the moment is that they're talking about, oh, you can actually you can delay your property taxes, right?
And
You
that
can put
becomes a problem when you
you
sell
you can
or you pass
defer.
down your
Yeah.
house.
And that's exactly the problem. So you can defer your property taxes, and that's fine because the city is basically saying, okay, the $2,000 that you owe us right now, or $3,000, or whatever the amount is, and let's not go into that discussion, right? Will just get basically added to. We'll put a lien on your house or a notice of security interest on your house for $3,000, which basically means that when you sell your property or when your kids sell your property, we'll recover all of the outstanding amount. So 3,000 becomes 6,000, becomes 9,000, becomes 29,000, becomes 65,000, etc., etc. You get where I'm going. I
It
don't think that's
effectively
a good.
becomes a tax on your heirs.
Yeah, it becomes a tax on your heirs, and I don't agree with that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and there also could be issues if you have to be shipped off to a nursing home somewhere.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
Right?
absolutely. Then
There's a
yeah,
lot of these things where people have to take into consideration and look into the future about some of these policies. Like one of the things that I've been specially trained in, I've done a lot of work in is policy and policy analysis. That's why I people always think, well, you're thinking this way because of this. I said, no, I don't think anyways on basis of any political parties. I think basically on policy. Hey, because yes, well, I'd love to be 65 and not pay property taxes. I'd love that. Hey, I think that would help my pocketbook quite a bit. But you have to look more realistically about how that's going to affect the property values, the property, a lot of things. Let's say if you want to sell that house too,
well,
there's going to be some issues too. So there's a lot of things that you have to consider.
and that's the same as those reverse mortgages, isn't it? Those,
Yep,
the
reverse
absolutely,
mortgages.
because the reverse mortgage isn't the fact, that at 65 you can release a lot of money from your thing on a reverse mortgage. Don't,
Yeah,
because it basically means that it's a tax on your heirs, as you put it. It's not really a tax, but essentially what's going to end up happening is when you die, your property has to be sold in order to, unless your heirs have got suddenly $250,000 to pay back the mortgage company, because they know that if you're around for 20 years and we've now built interest on that, that's a lot
mhm.
more money that you owe us. Essentially, your heirs now have to sell your house in order to pay off that loan.
Yeah, and that home will not be released until that tax is paid. So once you sell that home, say if you're selling that home, like say in the future at say at $500,000, and this tax has since accumulated to $120,000. I think this is going to be a concern because that value of that home has come down, and whoever is going to be buying your home is not going to be as eager to buy your home and buy for what you're asking for it,
Well,
to give you as much. So it's a very it's a vicious cycle that
yeah.
you're asking for.
And in some respects, the fact that grandma's handing down to grandkids a home is not a bad thing, so it should be a thing that they should do as a natural part, natural course. Why can't grandpa give, to one of his grandchildren a home?
Yeah, exactly. That happens. I
Yeah,
have one fellow that I worked with. He somebody in his family died, and they were multimillionaires, and he's got a multi-million-dollar trust, and somebody else handles it through a bank or a trust company, and he
yeah,
doesn't do anything. They got him a home. They got him all kinds of things. So he lives in a home. It belongs
yeah,
to the trust, but he can do
yeah,
whatever he wants as long as he talks to the trust about it. But it's very
yeah,
nice
yeah.
because it's a nice home that he has.
Well, I met a lady in a similar position. She, her basically her monthly, spending is controlled by the trust. Her home is controlled by the trust. If she wants more money, she has to go out to work, but she doesn't.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
There's a lot of flexibility built with him, and he can go talk to them.
yeah,
Says I need this for such and such, but the trustee has ultimate discretion.
yeah,
Right?
yeah.
They can choose to give it to
Well,
him, or they can choose not to.
yeah, but they are obliged to, the trustee in certain circumstances, like for house repairs, is
Yeah,
obliged to actually
yeah,
give in
yeah.
that
They do
regard.
have to work in
Yeah,
the interests of the person there who is the beneficiary.
yeah.
Right? Like the trustee can't just say, "Oh, a trip to Mexico for myself looks good."
No, because
He
they
can't
don't
do
get
that.
that. They can't do that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. So the other question that we were dealing with here, I think we're agreed that, benefit property tax shouldn't be reduced for members of people above 65. And as a person above 65, I don't agree with that either.
hmm
Right. There's probably should be some tax breaks, but that's a different matter entirely. Okay, so better transit. How can we make that happen? That's something we're going to have to explore this in the coming period.
yeah. That's going to be a very hefty topic because one of the problems is transit is being determined by people who drive who will never get on a bus. That's got to stop.
Yeah,
Right?
that's
We have
that's
to,
an
but we
interesting
do have
question.
to set up transit so that people who do drive will want to take it. Okay,
Well,
so you've got that vicious circle to work with.
do you remember a month or so ago I had to take my car into the shop because of an emergency that happened on it, and I couldn't get my car back. So I'm in St. Catharines, and we were looking at the bus timetable, and I'm like,
Yep.
okay, so I can get a 6 o'clock bus back to Niagara Falls that gets me into Niagara Falls, Dorchester and Morrison by 6:40. Not a bad problem. Gets me there by 6:40. Uh, okay, so how do I get home from Dorchester Morrison? The bus stopped at 5:30. What? We're a 22-hour city. What do you mean the bus stopped at 5:30?
So the buses are running bankers hours in Niagara Falls.
Yeah. What do you mean the bus stopped at 5:30? Right? The
Yeah, that's
regional
got to be changed.
and
That's got to
and
be
why
changed
the
so that
hell?
anybody can just grab a bus and go, like you were
Why
taking
the
the tube
hell?
when you're in London.
Yeah, and why the hell is the bus going to Dorchester and Morrison as its hub? No, 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 not in a million years is Dorchester and Morrison the hub, the city's hub. Now, regional
Hmm.
buses should go downtown, and
Yeah,
basically, we should be like, and to a large extent, what we need to be doing is, if we're going to run transit, we probably need to have a Fort Erie to we need Fort Erie to St. Catharines, Fort Erie to Niagara Falls, Fort Erie to Welland, Welland to St. Catharines, Welland to Niagara
yeah,
Falls. etc. services. Um, Thorough to St. Catharines, thorough to Niagara Falls services. But we also need to have some consideration that maybe you've got to get train services or stuff into St. Catherine's train station, for example, because
Yeah.
one of the routes that you're going to make is if should we be making something, or should the region be considering something like a region-wide train hub that is in addition to what is provided by Metrolinx currently, that takes people, that goes from regularly from St. Catherine's to Hamilton, for example, that
Hmm.
also has an ability to link to all these other places from the train hub in St. Catherine's.
Yeah. There's got to be better coordination. And then people should be able to do this on one fare.
Yeah,
Okay, and then use the Presto card or use some kind of mechanism so if you're coming back from Toronto and you want to come down to Niagara Falls, just hop on a bus in Niagara Falls and go. You just show your Toronto passport, you came from Go or whatever, and then just hop on a bus in Niagara Falls and go where you need to go, like for the transfer or whatever. And
yeah,
rather than having to pay another fare and pay another fare on top of another fare as you go, or taking 12 buses to get to one place, that's got to stop. You have to be able to get to places in the most efficient way possible so that you're not spending half
yeah.
your day on a bus.
Exactly. The thing is, I worked it out, and you and I sat in the office one morning, and we worked this out that if I'm going to have to get to work by bus, just because, let's say my car broke down, well, as it happens,
Hmm.
the car dealership is a nice one, and they'll give me a nice ride to St. Catharines, not a problem,
Hmm.
right? However, let's assume that it wasn't with a nice car dealership. We got to figure out other ways of getting there, right? So,
Hmm.
or I don't drive, right? How do I
Hmm.
get to St. Catharines to go to work when it takes me 2 hours to get there?
Exactly. And it doesn't make it practical for you to work. And
Yeah,
then you also have less opportunities for work
yeah,
because you can't go to all of these places.
yeah. So, in order to work on time, I've got to leave 2 hours before my allotted shift,
Yep.
right?
And
So,
and there's a lot of dead time,
yeah, right. And
right?
and
And this
how
is
how do you do that? How do you do that? Right. This is something that transit and okay. So I had this discussion, and I'm going to be playing. I'm going to be playing the discussion I had with Adam Hyde tomorrow. All right. So just but everybody is aware we got Adam Hyde on the in tomorrow because that was a discussion that I taped last Sunday before the thing. And one of the things that Adam talked about was transit, right? Because he
Mhm.
was talking about comparison of transit between what we have in Niagara, and Adam's basically saying, why should we have to use a car? Right?
Mhm.
We should be able to think about the fact that we could have transit here. He's lived in Japan, so he's looking at what they've got in Japan.
Yeah,
Why can't
so
we
if
have
he's
that?
comparing the Tokyo system or wherever he was in Japan with what we have here, you know, and same as when you were say when you lived in London, they
Yeah.
probably have a similar system.
Well, and the challenge is not so it's not fair to compare London or even Tokyo with Niagara region because because it's more, but it is fair to compare it with Toronto, for example.
Yep.
But that said, there are many parts in Europe whereby they do better transit, even in smaller regions like ours.
Yep, exactly. And they need to build these things. Even Hamilton. Hamilton's building a light rail network and you get a bus every 15 minutes and they run late. There's a lot of things that are happening in Hamilton. They're building a lot of transit networks. It's nowhere near perfect, but they're improving and they're working with the people in Hamilton to improve their transit service. And their Hamilton population is really not a lot more than what we have. It is a bit more, but we don't. but we're not hugely different. Where we have to say that we don't have the population brand. And besides that, with all these people moving from Toronto down here, there will be a better demand for transit because people from Toronto will say, "Where's the TTC here? Hey, I don't see any TTC bus here." Hey, especially when they start building condos that don't have any parking in them and stuff. Hey, so they're going to start asking you questions.
Yeah, and in fact, actually, we've seen a few of those approved in both Niagara Falls and in St. Catharines recently, where there's condos that do not have parking or do not have adequate parking. So the question is, how are you going to get to places if you don't have parking? Because hey, even when I lived in London and even when I used the tube all the time, I still had a car that I'd go home, and on a Saturday we'd go shopping, so we'd drive to the mall,
Hmm. Yep.
right? So,
And these are things where there has to be some balance too.
yeah,
Okay, and we have to address because right now, when people don't have a car, when they can't drive, say for example, you may not be able to drive, or perhaps you're one of the people who just can't afford to drive, though you have a license. Hey, these are things that create a lot of barriers. First of all, you cannot get a job. Right? Most jobs tell you have to have a car, or you have to get to the job somehow.
yeah,
And the other way is that you have you become very isolated, particularly in an area like Niagara region. You become very isolated because you can't get to places where you normally would be able to get to if you drove. Like, say, you want to go down to like a New Year's Eve, they have this big thing at Victoria Park or whatever it is in Niagara Falls.
yeah.
Hey, you're not gonna get there by riding a bus. You have to drive there somehow or take an Uber or whatever. So there's a lot of these things that I know that happen in Toronto where they actually set up extra bus service for people to go to special events. So, and they try to arrange it so that it doesn't interfere with the special event itself, but it's done better because they
But
seem
again,
to have a planner
again,
on staff that actually knows what they're doing.
yeah, but again, there is an important question there, and we'll have to end it at that point. Is how do we make that better transit, but yet not have it cost a fortune?
Yeah, or costs a fortune to get on, like for the fares.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, you see, the thing is, I think if there was a $3 fare, that's probably going to be a reasonable fare. But if you're talking about but if the tax is going up by 20-30% because we have transit, that's a problem, right?
Hmm.
And I don't know what the answer to that is, but I just know that it's a problem, you know. And
Well,
so,
that's why
eh,
we have the
so,
gas tax. The
we
gas
turn
tax
around.
pays for part of the transit.
Yeah, but
Okay.
it is not, the money isn't necessarily coming back into the region, is it?
Yeah, well, it should. They have to be more transparent about it, I think. Hey, they can't be just sitting there dawdling and say, "Well, this is where this money goes," and nobody knows where it goes because, as far as I know, is a lot of the stuff does go into a big black hole.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem that we all face. All right, I'm going to have Adam's session tomorrow, and then we can break down some of this into further, break down this what we're discussing today further for Friday. Sound like
Okay.
a plan?
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. Sounds great.
All right. So bye, everybody. Have a great day, and well, take care of yourself. And I'm not going to repeat what Dave repeats because it's just not me.
Yeah.
Any final
Well,
words,
as I
Angela?
say, yeah. Yep.
All right, and well, thank you everybody for joining us and commenting as normal. Thank you. Bye.
Good. Good. Excellent.